right out at the lake, and it's sunny and clear and lovely.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Like I said, we were expecting rain because the first tropical storm came in off of the coast. So Arthur is its name. So it came in, I want to say yesterday, and it's expecting to give us rain all the way through the week. So I stepped outside, and it was definitely a little bit on the gray side, but that's all right. We need the rain for the folks that are into gardens and things of that nature. So
Absolutely, absolutely. As long as it doesn't turn into a, destructive storm.
exactly. Yeah, we don't like those destructive storms. We've had enough of those in
Yeah,
North Carolina and other places. So,
and
and they said it
throughout
was going to
your
be a
region.
tropical storm as opposed to a hurricane. But yeah, we're definitely
Good.
in the region where we get a lot of these kind of storms. So
Yeah.
that being said, that's just what we're used to. But yeah, I was really interested in getting you on the show because I've just been a fan of yours and followed a little bit of what you've been doing with businesses. And I've been called a connector. Friends of mine tell me that I'm a connector and things of that nature and networker and all of that. But compared to you, I'm nothing because, like I said, I just have like a decent Rolodex and a lot of people that I know and try to connect with. But I don't think that I have like names like Bill Clinton and Bishop Tutu in my Rolodex like you probably have. But
Well, yes, but the thing is, I think I'm a little bit older than you, Mark.
yeah,
And whenever people ask me how I know all these famous people, I say because I knew them before they were famous.
right,
Like the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, I was working with them when, at the time, the African National Congress and its supporters were viewed by the United States as being Marxist terrorist bomb throwers. And so they were all underground. They were not household names. And then, and I started this in the 70s. I started civil rights and human rights work in the US in the 60s and women's rights. And then that kind of naturally led to me becoming involved in global liberation movements. But really, so many of the people I worked with were completely unknown until the world stage changed and then they became super famous.
right.
So I think, if you've been around long enough in what I call this very long relay race for social justice, you get to meet a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, on our regular podcast, and this will be done as a special edition, like I told you, but in our regular podcast last night, we had Rosa Clemente on, and she was sharing some of that same kind of stuff because she's in that kind of, she's probably closer to my age. I'm like around late 50s, pushing around mid to late 50s. I'll turn 58 July 1, and she's probably in that same target
Okay, so
age range.
I've got well over a decade over you, so.
Yeah, easily a decade over me and everything. And I know that my folks were actually involved in civil rights stuff. My dad founded a school, the Malcolm X School, or he was one of the founders that was started in Durham, moved to Greensboro, didn't stay
How
around that
great.
long,
How
but
great.
it was around for a few years. I was actually a kid at the time. I think I was probably, my younger brother was actually born during the grand opening. So he was born in 69 and he's 7 years younger than I am. So I was probably 7 when they were starting that, like between 7 and 10. But he was definitely involved in civil rights struggles and things of that nature. He knew folks like Howard Fuller and some of the other civil rights leaders of that era that you're talking about in the 60s and everything. Just out of curiosity, you're in Switzerland now, but of course we've seen with COVID and everything,
Oh, yeah.
race relations and just relations in general coming to the forefront. But I was wondering, how are you feeling as an activist and an activist of a number of years in women's rights and civil rights as to how we're doing? This is the 21st century, and I'm wondering how you're feeling as to how we're doing, or do we still have a long way to go?
Well, I like to look at it this way. When I think back to myself in the 60s, I really truly believed we were going to completely change the world right then and there.
Right.
And it was a sprint, and we had to go as fast as we could, as hard as we could, because like everything was going to change. And then, another 2 decades passed, and by the 80s, I began to think of it as a marathon, which I thought would be the end of the analogy, that, I had to pace myself, I had to find ways to nourish myself, to keep my spirit up despite all the setbacks. And then another 2 decades passed, and I began to view it as a relay race.
Wow.
I thought about it, and I thought about it, like your dad and me, we were able to do what we did because of amazing human beings who came before us. Sojourner Truth and others who were just, knocked down barriers and opened up possibilities that we stand on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's several generations younger than me, but the youngest generation now, teenagers, I'm so utterly inspired by them. I mean, I come from the era of organizing where it's index cards in a shoebox and, a mimeograph machine and a carbon paper and a manual typewriter. And these younger emerging leader activists, they're so social media savvy and they know how to use technology to amplify their voices. And they're not just, a lot of people my age and even younger than me talk very disparagingly about them, like, oh yeah, so they tweet about it. No, they're doing a lot more than tweeting about it. But yes, they do tweet about it and they have hundreds of thousands of followers who then take actions because they're promoting various causes, whether it's climate change, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's stopping gun violence and other forms of violence against all people, but particularly people of color and disenfranchised people. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And so that's what my husband's mantra, which he took from Reverend Jesse Jackson, is keep hope alive.
Right.
And the way that each of us, because he's older than I am, he's going to be 85 in this Saturday.
Wow.
And he's stupendous. He's in great shape. He rides his bike every day. If you saw him, you thought he might be 70. But he and I, the way that we've both sustained our activism over so many decades is by recognizing that there's a beautiful quote in the Talmud, and I don't have it right in front of me, so I'm not going to say it exactly the way it is, but it's basically, do not be weary, do not become discouraged and weary by the enormity of what needs to be changed to make a better world. You are not responsible for solving everything. However, you absolutely cannot abdicate your responsibility to do as much as you can towards that goal with your life. Right. So it's that idea that every little act has ripple effects, and we all kind of grow off each other and build off each other. And that's what, allows me to get up in the morning.
No, I know the feeling, and I definitely agree. And by the way, my dad will turn close to your husband's age. Your husband has him by a few years. He'll turn 80 in June. My mom will turn 78 this month, in the month of May. And dad will turn 80 and is still, like you said, very active, still biking all over the place. People that see him around the community oftentimes think of him as being like my brother versus my dad, because he still has a very youthful demeanor. Still, when I tell him about that, he's like, no, I'm still feeling the pains of my age and things of that nature. But those that know him in the community, they're like, we don't see it, because they're wondering, well, he's discovered the fountain of youth and something and hasn't revealed it to us because he's got it tucked away somewhere. But they're definitely
a combination of the physical bike riding and things like that. But I think also when you stay engaged in civic affairs, political affairs, current affairs, I think it keeps you young in spirit. Yeah. A lot of women my age would not have their hair in a ponytail and wearing a t-shirt, which is basically like the way I live my life. But my spirit feels, my body definitely tells me I'm an older person. I have to admit that. But my spirit and my curiosity to learn, that there's always more to learn. And, what I was saying earlier about the younger leaders, I've always viewed mentoring as a two-way street.
Right.
But it's not like I was very lucky. I grew up in Brooklyn. My early mentors were Shirley Chisholm and Bella Abzug. And what I loved about the both of them is they were so prescient in saying, as Frederick Douglass had said long before them, that the issues of racism, sexism, and classism are inextricably intertwined, and you cannot solve any one of them without addressing all of them. And that young people now, they're really talking a lot about intersectionality and, cross purpose organizing and supporting each other's movements. They recognize that the whole is always greater than the sum of the parts, and that the more people cooperate.
Yep, that's my phone. Sorry for that. I'm gonna put that on mute. But yeah, go ahead and continue the thought and everything.
The more people cooperate, the more likely it is that you're going to have success. This is why I've been a coalition builder from, the 1960s straight through. Like I tend to see things as very much connected to each other. Interconnectedness is a theme that's been central in my life.
It's really interesting you say that, because one of the things that's been going on here in our community, and we brought up in our podcast, I've had conversations with some of the activists. I was actually involved in Occupy Durham and the Occupy movement, is that sometimes there's the generational thing where I agree that the younger generation tries to reach out to the older generation and other generations, but sometimes there's almost like a generational conflict that sometimes we don't want to listen to the young generation. Even though I'm like you, I'm a big supporter of a lot of the young leaders. I thought that the things that Greta did were just amazing with her environmental justice work. Environmental justice work that she was doing.
There are tens of thousands of unknown Gretas. That's what's so great. There are really young activists everywhere in the world. Just last week, I was one of the organizations I've been involved with forever is called Global Citizen Circle. And for 46 years, it's been convening extremely diverse people from every different socioeconomic background and different sectors and different races and religions and nationalities to discuss the problems of the day with a goal of collectively coming up with sustainable solutions and giving each other the support to do the work they did. And the circle we held just last, whatever May 12th was, I think that's Tuesday, was called What Happens Next? The New Generation Leads. And the people who led the discussion ranged from age 18 to 21. Oh. And it included a Somali refugee activist in the March for Our Lives movement who lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a young woman from India who's organizing safe shelters for women. And that's become even more important during the time of COVID, where domestic violence has risen everywhere in the world. And another, they were from Kosovo and from the Middle East, from Palestine and Israel. And we had like 80 participants from 20 countries. And it was very, very inspiring because, and then we also had people like me, several men and women who spoke up and said, okay, like I was at it, back in the 60s, what are you guys going to do to like not make the mistakes we made? And it was really such a rich conversation. And I think that those people who are willing to listen, learn, and lead from each other, regardless of like I learn as much from them and as they learn from me, and there's like a mutual respect. And I think when I think the more we create safe spaces where we allow for mutual respect and civil discourse, the more the possibilities of really coming up with solutions. Like one of the women, she said, you know, I've been doing this for more than 57 years. And, you know, this conversation is making me think I need to go down to my basement and find the boxes, all my boxes of storage of you know, leaflets and flyers and things, and go through it and see, where did we drop the ball? She said, because like in 64, 65, you know, we got a lot of legislation passed, the Voting Rights Act, a series of things. And then maybe we became a little too complacent, you know, so, and maybe we thought we'd solved things. And clearly what we see today, I mean, the horror of unarmed young Black men being shot down in our streets is just beyond heartbreaking, infuriating. There are no words for that, and it comes on a legacy of a history of America not yet having really dealt with its fundamental racism, and you know, we have to.
Do you think that we will do that? Because I mean, that's one of my great fears is we don't seem to have dealt with those legacies and those fears. Because I mean, there's just so many things that are going on in the world that scare us on a regular basis, including who's in the, you know, number 45, who's in the office and everything, and apparently spreading a lot of this kind of stuff. I mean, I get what's going on with COVID and things of that nature. I get that people want to go back to work. I mean, I would love to go back to the jobs that I have been temporarily laid off from as well. But I don't know that I'm all that big of folks marching down the streets in Raleigh or in Wisconsin with guns and other things trying to force people to do that. So it just seems like we've gotten away from a lot of things that we shouldn't have gotten away from.
Well, I think that the COVID-19 global pandemic has just kind of laid bare what was already there. You know, a shocking disparity of access to healthcare, education, housing, safety, and other basic needs throughout the US and the world. And it's highlighted the best and the worst of humankind. So the worst is some of what you're talking about. It's exacerbated this fear-driven, divisive politics of us and them that was already growing. Too many nativist, xenophobic leaders around the world, as you refer to. I don't even like to give him a number. DJT is as much as I'm willing to say. And the disturbing way, more recently, for example, that only those who really already had access, i.e. wealthy, wealth and status, were able to secure the greater share of the relief funds before the small businesses and individuals who were really suffering, and the frontline workers, sanitation workers, and transportation workers, and of course healthcare workers didn't get the same access, and so you see the worst of it, but then you also see the best of humanity. I mean, you see ordinary people doing extraordinary things, helping others. You see small communities. One of my friends in Nyack, New York, who's an organizer, he got like 600 people in Nyack to start making masks, and they've made over 100,000 masks that they've donated to hospitals and nursing facilities, and you know, and there's so many stories like that everywhere in the world. One of my favorite quotes is by the great anthropologist Margaret Mead. You know, never underestimate what a small, thoughtful, committed group of citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has changed it. So again, I feel like we each have a choice. Like there's always been what I'll call the force of dark, you know, fearful, territorial, my family, my village, my people, my race, my nationality are good, and everybody else is, at the least disparagingly and at the worst destructively, like, let's kill them. And then at the same time, there have always been what I'll call voices of light, open, compassionate, welcoming. I mean, every scripture on earth, the Quran, the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament, Hinduism, Buddhism, there's no faith-based tradition on earth that doesn't talk about feeding the hungry and welcoming the stranger and caring for the poor and the needy. And so I think this is why the Star Wars franchise is so wildly popular among people, because they even if they haven't like formulated it as a philosophy, people just kind of resonate with that dark versus light force. And I think we each have a choice, like every day, to say, it's definitely easy to become dispirited by the enormity of darkness.
Right.
But we have a choice. We can go into a downward spiral of being dispirited by that, or we can say, I'm going to choose to be a voice of light, and I'm going to choose to amplify other people who are voices of light, because that mitigates against it.
You actually mentioned an interesting fact, and I've actually had that conversation with a friend of mine not that long ago, which is the fact that we get into these conversations about faith and religion and things of that nature, and the division forces that exist in that. I mean, many of the great wars were based on religion and things of that nature. But the truth of the matter, and you just stated it very well, is that most of the world religions, I can't think of a world religion. I even argue that even those that might not be religious, whether they're agnostic or atheist,
Absolutely.
they believe in something, and by believing in something, they also have a lot of those very basic belief systems. So, and I think that if you study just about any of the books, and you named a couple of them, the Quran, definitely the Bible, I think some of the Hindu passages, and I don't remember the title of the books, unfortunately, but if you read all of them, they're based on very common facts, and they have a very common thread in them. And whether you, I have some family members, I won't name which ones that I'm talking about, but that they might believe of it as mythology versus reality. But whether you think of it as a book of mythology or a book of real life and these people actually existed, no matter how you think of the books, it's still the very common morality is throughout all of them. So it always fascinates me that a lot of the wars and things that go on in the world are based on religion and land. And I mean, I definitely get the land thing, because people are always trying to take over somebody's land or somebody's property and everything, resources. But it just seems like a lot of the basic facts are right there in those books, which is a feeling of love for all. It's very common in all of the books. I mean, there may be some different nuances within that love, but it's definitely love for all, love for the planet, and a lot of very common themes that are in all the books.
Exactly. And as you said, even secular humanists, without having to have a religious ideology, it's that the core principles of love, compassion, kindness, generosity of spirit. Some secular humanists I know who exhibit those qualities, to me, are like the most religious human beings I know, even though they don't affiliate with a particular religion. And you're right, also horrible things have been done in the name of religion. I mean, and there's no one religion that's exempt from that. I mean, every single faith-based tradition has had people and movements based on that fear-based us, them, we're the chosen ones, everybody else is evil, and at the least to be put down, and at the worst to be actually destroyed. Yes, that is true. From the Crusades on through, there have been horrific acts. When you think about it, there is no one thing that in and of itself is good or evil. It all depends on how you use it. So take, for instance, the concept of charisma.
Right.
Like charisma is very powerful. So charisma can be like Nelson Mandela,
Yeah.
and really inspiring people to be their very best self. I mean, here's a man who was brutally imprisoned under horrific, tortured, and for 27 years, and so easily could have come out with a desire for vengeance, and instead came out saying, we need to work with the very people who oppressed us if we are going to save our nation. I mean, you don't have a more exemplary uh, charisma than that. But on the other side of the coin, Hitler was
Yeah.
amazingly charismatic and mobilized sadly, too many followers who, drank the Kool-Aid and took in, and destroyed. So it happened in Germany in the Holocaust. It happened in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge. It happened in Rwanda with the Tutsi Hutu, Hutu, and
Yeah.
it, it, it's like you can use religion, you can use charisma for good or for bad, and we have to support those who are using it for good and stand up against those who are using it for to disseminate more hatred.
Yeah, we definitely have to do that. I was just wondering. Now, one of the things I was actually just reading before jumping on the call with you, and I've read some of the books before, some of the literature, but I was reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And one of the things that goes on is sometimes you might have to have the force of, I won't say a negative force, but a force that is going to represent something that is going to be something that the establishment doesn't want to deal with on a regular basis in order to have the more peaceful aspect
Yes.
dealt with. So, you had Malcolm, then Malcolm was going with Martin. So I don't know that Malcolm would have been successful without Martin or Martin successful without Malcolm. And the same thing even with Nelson Mandela and the ANC and things of that nature. So I just wondered, do you think that has to happen in order for change to happen, that you have to have, I would even argue Gandhi in India, because there were people in India that were definitely being more forceful than Gandhi was with his peaceful movement and everything. And I'm
Yeah.
definitely one of the most peaceful people in the world. But I just wonder sometimes if you don't have to have those other elements. Even when we were talking to Rosa yesterday, and there were some people on the conversation that were talking about the fact that this is a new generation. We're talking about the generation of African American leaders, and some of them were basically like saying that they would not have the same, and it's easy to say in hindsight it's 2020, but they were saying they would not have had the same reaction to some of the oppression that was going on with their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents now, because they feel that they
Yeah.
are a little bit more forceful in the way that they want to respond. So I'm just wondering some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I have two takes on that. One is exactly what you're talking about, that within movements you need kind of shaker-uppers
Right.
along with conciliators. Like both aspects of a way of behaving are needed. Like you need the people who can go into the room and cut the deal and do the negotiating and listen to people who they really strongly disagree with. I mean, there's never been a peace treaty on earth that didn't result from former enemies, in most cases, former combatants, actually sitting down in the room together. So
Right.
these people who were like murdering each other, and then they're the ones who are negotiating the peace deal. And, that's true whether we're talking about Northern Ireland or we're talking about anywhere else on the face of the earth, South Africa included. So you need people who can do that. And then you also need the people who are really forcefully demanding rights. I mean, it's like, if you remember when Obama came into office and people before him, they said, I need you out there to be pushing me.
Right.
Like, I need you to be protesting. For me to be able to advance a social agenda, I need you to be pushing me harder than I want to be pushed. And so we need people like that. The other take I have on it is, and perhaps this is, again, having been around for a long time, and been through a bunch of peaks and valleys. Dr. King said the arc of justice, again, I'm extrapolating, not exactly, it is long, but it bends toward justice. It bends toward righteousness. Yeah. So, it's not a linear lineup. But if you look at the curve, like when people say to me, for different things, I found somebody was rummaging through a vintage shop, and they came across a 1970 Rolling Stones magazine, just a year after the publication started to be printed. And they just literally were like, and then they came across a picture and they said, oh my God, this has to be Nadine. So they bought the paper, they scanned it, they emailed me and said, is this you? And I said, yes, I know exactly where I was. And I'm holding a sign, women are not sex objects. So I immediately posted it on all my social media platforms. And I got a lot of young women making comments like, oh my God, nothing's changed. We could be holding the same sign that we're holding right now. Like it, and I wrote back to them, to each of them, saying some version of, believe me, I would have loved to think that by now we would be further along in the trajectory than we are toward gender equity, racial equity, all forms of social justice. But don't think for 1 minute we are where we were in 1970. Like, just watch one episode of Mad Men if you think that. I mean, it was a totally misogynistic, racist society that in which it was acceptable to be that way, like fully acceptable to be that way.
No, exactly. But you can even look at the people in Congress. I mean, like I said, I mentioned Rosa Clemente, who I had on the show yesterday, but also AOC, Alexandria Ortega-Cortez, Ileana over there in Michigan, I believe it is, and a number of other folks that are serving in the political office that would not have been serving in 1970. It would have been nowhere in the conversation.
Been able to pour the coffee in the room. I mean, it's just like, absolutely, like, we have to celebrate the advances, because, as I say, it's just all too easy to give up or feel defeated. And I'm not minimizing the pain and suffering. Like, I know that no matter how empathetic I am, there is no way for me to fully grasp what it would feel like now for me to be a young Black man, afraid to go out and jog, afraid for my life. I realize that there's just no way for me to fully grasp how painful that is, how devastatingly soul crushing that is. Wow. So I'm not demeaning or disparaging and saying, oh, just be cheerful and rosy. No. I'm not being Pollyannish. I'm saying, despite there's a progressive Christian minister, Jim Wallace, who said something like, defines faith as being believing in the possibility despite the evidence, and then acting to change the evidence.
Oh, wow.
So, again, it's the Jesse Jackson refrain, keep hope alive. Like, this is not to negate how much pain individuals are under, and easy for me, white skin, blue eyes, to say, keep hope alive, keep working, keep trying. And But
you actually bring up
I do
another
feel that it is actually the same message that both Malcolm X and Dr. King were saying, like, I am a man. I am going to stand up for my rights. I am a woman. Sojourner Truth, ain't I a woman? I do belong in this room at this table. Shirley Chisholm, if they don't give you a chair at the table, bring a folding chair. You know,
yeah.
so it's not just me. I mean, it's a lot of
No.
people who far greater than me who have advocated for keep hope alive and keep working. And yes, do whatever it is you need to do to comfort yourself and each other in the face of such horrifying pain.
No, yeah. And another question, and then one of our listeners or people that are on Facebook, and actually we take a class together with Tim Song, had a question for you as well, and I'll bring that up. But the question that I had was in terms of like even the past president Obama, and I was a big fan of Obama and worked on his campaign. But there were some of the activists in the community, even some activists in your generation, that felt that he didn't do enough. Now I know that there are limitations with what you can do because of the nature of politics. But what are your thoughts on that? Did you feel that enough was done by Obama on a lot of these issues, or was he trapped by the limitations that exist just in the nature of politics?
Both and, not either or. This is a
Okay.
both and. For me, working for his election campaign, and I actually first was exposed to him again. This is the story of how do you know these people? Like, we were doing a global citizen circle in 1990 when he was a Harvard law student, and we were doing it in Boston, and he was invited. So I've been aware of him. He was a student organizer. He was actually organizing a protest on the campus of Harvard because the great Professor Derek Bell, he was supporting him and saying that there needs to be, like, there's such a shocking lack of tenured professors of color or tenured female professors, and they were leading this movement to change that. So that by the time it came around to his 2004 primary race for the Senate, I was a supporter of him in that. And then, of course, he gave that speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention, which changed him suddenly from being, someone like people like me knew about to someone the whole world knew about.
Right.
And so working on his campaign for me was he was a truly transformational candidate. It was like a new generation, the prospect of the first Black, everything about who he was, as you were saying, could not have happened earlier, and was happening because of all the work that has been done. Right. Now, certainly, then he came into, well, first of all, he inherited like the worst financial meltdown since the Great Depression. Preceding now, we're having a comparable kind of meltdown, but at the time it was the worst. And he had to work with a Congress and Senate in which the members of the other party from day one just made it clear that our job is to see that not a single piece of legislation that he wants gets passed.
Yeah.
And he was more of the conciliator type of leader. And he did try to bring people together. And there were just too many of those resistant, territorial, good, bad, us, them, who fought against him. And it's amazing that he got the Affordable Health Care Act, that's known to most people as Obamacare, passed. I mean, that's just remarkable. For decades, people had been trying to pass some type of healthcare reform. Did it go far enough? No. Has it solved our healthcare problems? No. But there are 36 million more Americans on healthcare now because of it than there were before. And everybody who had a child who was under 26 could keep their child on their policy until they were 26, which, there were so many breakthroughs in it. And yes, there had to be the voices like Dr. Cornel West who were saying, man, you're not doing enough.
Right.
You got the foot in the door, but what are you doing to shake things up? And so you have to have the Cornel Wests alongside of the Barack Obamas. It's part and parcel of moving the agenda forward.
Yeah, and you definitely have to move the agenda forward. I was just wondering, you referred to her a couple of times, and I'm a big fan. I remember a friend of mine, well, actually an acquaintance, I should say, did a movie about Shirley Chisholm. People talk about Jesse Jackson running for the being like the first presidential candidate. Sometimes they forget Shirley ran even before Jesse did, and did a great job and had a very effective campaign, tied into both the women's movement and the African American movement. But I was just wondering, I saw parts of the Netflix series about somebody that was not a fan of feminism or a fan of some of the great things that have gone on in the world, that being the movie about Phyllis Schlafly. And I was wondering what you thought of the portrayal of those women that were friends of yours in that movie, because they did try to portray Bella, they did try to portray Shirley Chisholm, they did try to portray some of the folks that were involved in that movement about Phyllis's life.
So if your friend who worked on the Shirley Chisholm film worked on the film Unbossed and
that's the one I'm talking about.
And Unbossed, yeah. I love that film. I've watched it so many times, and every time I watch it, I think, oh my God, she was so prescient, things she was saying. Then, she got a lot of resistance, even from respected members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Right. So we have to remember that, right now, all kinds of people walk around with Malcolm X t-shirts. But believe me, in the 1960s, most white people, they really liked Dr. King, and they were really afraid of Malcolm X. So, there's a way in which we can kind of over glamorize the past.
I would argue the same with Che Guevara. A lot of people walked around with Che Guevara shirts on without even understanding who he was.
And exactly, there you go. So Shirley was not just welcomed into the bosom of the Congress, not even, by the men who were in the Congressional Black Caucus. Several of them really didn't like her forceful style, and didn't like that there was a woman in the old boys club. I mean, we can talk about the old white boys club, but there was also an old black boys club, and it was a boys club, and she was not a boy.
Right.
So when people look at the film now, but she was amazing. She was extraordinary. I have to admit, I have not yet watched the series. I know I have to watch it. I just haven't brought myself to be able to watch it, because I was so disturbed by Phyllis Schlafly in real life, when she was in real life doing what she was doing, which was so horrible, when I was a very strong supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment and doing all kinds of work to make sure it would pass. And she was doing everything she could to make sure it didn't pass, which it didn't, as you know. And you may know that there's a revived ERA coalition that Carol Jenkins is leading. Carol Jenkins, who was a newscaster for many years, one of the first African-American women to be a major network newscaster, who then went on to head the Women's Media Center, and then formed Carol Jenkins Media, where she does on CUNY TV, she does a fabulous interview series with different Black history makers, ranging from the ballerina Misty Copeland, to Opal Tometi, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. Just a fantastic. And so, but for the last year or longer, she's been the president of the new ERA coalition that's working to pass the amendment. Anyway, that was a very long-winded way of saying I haven't yet watched it, so I can't answer your question, but I have talked to people who told me about it. And it seems to me, from what I've heard, but this is just hearsay, so I can't validate this, that they weren't particularly happy with the way though the feminist leaders of that era were portrayed. The person who told me this said she felt that there was way too much focus on all the infighting between different arms of the movement. And sadly, I mean, if anybody's ever been involved in a movement, then you know there's always infighting. I mean, humans are humans, and this just comes with the territory, and it's always tragic, but it's just there.
No, I remember the infighting that even exists when we were part of Occupy Durham and some of the things like that. I mean, and that's supposed to be a movement that was based on the whole concept of giving everybody a voice and things of that nature. But there was still infighting even going on in that movement. So, and part of the reason that it probably didn't take off as much as it could have taken off in terms of being more of a global movement, kind of a takeoff of the Brexit and some of the other things that happened in other parts of the world before it, as I recall the history. But definitely, I don't feel that it gravitated as much as it could have. And part of that, like you said, was the infighting that was going on. Unfortunately, that does happen too often. Is too much infighting going on in these kind of situations. And I don't know why. But do you think that a ERA movement could succeed? Because I'm a big fan, and I agree that we need the race movement needs to be addressed, the race inequalities, and by that I mean all the different races, because our brown people are going through a lot with everything that they're going through with DACA and with the different other things that they are facing on a regular basis. I have some red blood in me in addition to the African American blood, and a lot of people even forget about what goes on the reservations and things of that nature, and a lot of these other kind of things that are just atrocities. Of course, we talk about coronavirus, and that's highlighting the racism that exists toward our Asian brothers and sisters. So there's just a lot of racism needs to be addressed, but definitely sexism also needs to be addressed. I mean, I know there's a big movement against certain websites that are highlighting parts of the women's body in a very exploitative kind of way, and they feel that some of these sites are targeting our children and things of that nature. So I know that there's movements against them and having them taken off and things of that nature. So there's a lot of these kind of things that are going on in our world. But I was just wondering, how do you feel in the 21st century? We're 20 years into the 21st century. We can do in terms of moving the bar, even with, because like I said, I really thought that the ERA was going to pass, and it did not. And I was hoping that it would pass. I know some people are satisfied with the Title IX things, and they have helped women in sports and other things, but there's so much more that can be done in terms of like
Title IX is amazing. Title IX not only created amazing opportunities for women in sports, and believe me, there's still a huge battle to be fought for equal, even a fraction of the pay inequity between women's sports and male sports. But it not only created opportunities in sports, but there's so much research that shows that when you feel the agency of your body, the strength of your being, it empowers you, not just physically, it empowers you, like girls who have played sports do better at math, are less likely to have teenage pregnancies. I mean, you can click through a whole list of things that doing sport and being in sport is. I went to school at a time when the boys went to gym and the girls went to home ec.
Yeah.
So literally, I throw like a girl. I mean, I know that's a derogatory, but I literally throw like a girl because I never learned how to do the most fundamental physical actions. And I see my nieces and how much further along they are. And then I see my granddaughters and I see how much further along they are. And they are so in themselves and of themselves, and they know who they are, and they're confident. And it's so gorgeous. It's so yes, that's where I get my hope. It's not that we definitely still have to keep working at the underlying systemic issues in every sector. government, business, even in the not-for-profit world, and the as we were saying, there's infighting and movements. There's no part of the world that's exempt from the underlying systemic causes of poverty, inequity. We definitely need to keep working on those, and people can choose what speaks to their heart, their soul. Like, right. I'm going to work on poverty because that's what really speaks to me. I'm going to work on early childhood education because that's what speaks to me. I'm going to work on reform of the criminal justice system because that speaks to me. You don't have to take on everything. You just have to say what, like in my case, I happen to be a generalist. I'm not, there's no topic on earth that there aren't a million people who know more about it than I do. I'm not a specialist in anything, but I'm a connector of the dots. I'm a bridge builder. So there's no area where we haven't actually advanced, but we have to stay constantly vigilant to protect those advancements because there's always forces fighting back to go back. I mean, look at what has happened with the rollback on the environmental, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. I mean, it's just, and these things have impact that and again, disproportionately affect marginalized communities because that's where the toxic waste dumps are. And
I grew up in a neighborhood that was part of those toxic waste dumps. I grew up in a town that was kind of, in a lot of minds, the home of the environmental justice movement, because I grew up, was born here in Durham when I still live in Durham, but I grew up in Warren County, and Warren County is actually where that major dump of one of those chemicals that you're talking about was dumped, and that's how the environmental justice movement started, with the marches and things of that nature. And you're right, there was a lot of young people that were doing those marches. I was coming back from college around that time because I think that was in the early 80s, and I was coming back, and I remember my parents having the radio station, so it was either late 70s, early 80s, so I can't remember whether it was during my high school years or my college years, but it was definitely in that time frame, and they were people that were near my age, and of course they were my parents' age, and at that time they were in their 30s or 40s. They were part of that, and they were covering it because they actually had a radio station that was a community radio station, kind of like our NPR stations now, but it was not affiliated. Many of them, even to this day, are affiliated with universities, but they did one of the few that was actually community-based. It was actually in the community and didn't have a tie to a university. I mean, it eventually was, I think, Wesleyan, which is a college in Rocky Mount, took it over and they used to have the signal. But the time they were on, which was like about 1976 to maybe the late 80s or something like that, it was community people. And a lot of these were folks that were into jazz. They loved jazz music. They loved other form of music, but they turned on their radio. They didn't hear that. They didn't hear the news that they wanted to hear. I mean, because the news anchors weren't covering the way that they thought it should be covered, because they were fans of Mother Earth News, Progressive magazine, that kind of stuff. And they weren't seeing that kind of coverage in our local area. So they took it upon themselves, with no media background at all, to start their own radio station. So that's kind of our background. Yep. So radio, I have that kind of background.
Wow.
So that's part of my, and I want to get to these questions. There's a couple of listeners are watching, and because we're doing it as a Facebook Live, and like I said, it will go eventually on our website. But one of them is a quick question for you, and you may want to take it, you may not. But Tim Stone, who, like I said, I'm taking a course of his on how to do these whole internet kind of courses, and he's doing a great job of teaching those. But he says, who do you want to be the next president and why? And I know, just to give some thoughts on that, because I know a lot of people don't want to mention, I think you were going to give the initials. I gave him a number. And a lot of times on our show, we don't even give them that. But then people are also concerned about some of the feminist allegations against the other party as well, and some of the things that he's going on. So there are some down parts of both candidates. So I was just wondering, and this, like I said, my friend Tim wants to know, who do you want to be the next president and why? And then I've got another question that's actually related to some of your other work, and that's the question that Robinder is asking from India. So I want to get to the president one, and then I'm going to get to the question that ties in to a lot of your other kind of work.
So is it Tim who's asking the question about the president?
Yes.
So Tim, My first presidential campaign that I worked on actively was 1964. My husband was working on Madly for Adley long before that. So I've been at this a long time, and I hope you don't take this as having thrown in the towel. But honestly, I am going to wholeheartedly throw my support against the Democratic ticket, regardless of who the current nominee, Joe Biden, chooses to be his running mate. I feel it is so absolutely critical to stop the worst president who, in history, in American history, who has caused so many horrifying things to happen in our country, allowed them, given people permission to act out on, as you were saying earlier, Marc, marching with guns, with machine guns to against peaceful protesters. I mean, it's just terrible. So he's got to be stopped, and it's I will just throw my support and my energy and my work. And I happen to be living overseas right now, so I do it through Democrats Abroad, and I do get out the vote, and I'm on a making calls to make sure that every expat who can vote in the Democratic will vote, and that most of the presidential candidates I have supported in my lifetime have not won because I'm left of center, and they're not the candidates. To give you an idea of where I started, like in the 1968 campaign, my big existential dilemma was whether to support Eugene McCarthy or to support Eldridge Cleaver on the Peace and Freedom ticket. And at that point, I made a decision that there's no way that Eldridge Cleaver was going to win a nomination. So I decided to work with Gene McCarthy, the peace candidate. But I wore my peace and freedom buttons every day, as I was doing my work to show that, okay, I'm a little bit further progressive than this candidate. I want you to know I'm further progressive. I want you to know that I wish there was like a more progressive candidate, but this is the most progressive candidate we have. So, I mean, I've been really hoping and praying, despite of all her prior statements of, I don't want to ever be in a political campaign. I would love to see Michelle Obama as the vice presidential candidate. She is the most admired woman in America and the world by several Gallup polls. Her book sold 10 million copies in 45 languages around the world. She has utter integrity and is brilliant. We have a sign still hanging in our house, I love Obama, and her husband's okay too, which is from the 2008 campaign. So I would love to see that, and I'm actually involved in a movement, a Michelle 2020 movement, to just show her how many people want her to be on the ticket, not to pressure her, because it's entirely her choice to make, right. But to show her with hopes that as a patriot, she might reconsider. But as I say, whoever he is chosen to be the vice presidential running mate, I'm going to work for that ticket. I learned my lesson. Like in 1968, when not only did Gene McCarthy not win, but Hubert Humphrey won the Democratic nomination. And in hindsight, Hubert Humphrey was a good, solid, progressive Democrat. Right. There were things like he didn't, not seating the Mississippi delegation in 64. I mean, there were things that were not good about him, but he was a solid candidate. But I did not go out and work for him the way that I had been working for Gene McCarthy. And look what we got, Yeah. Nixon became the president. And so, I think it was like, I really, really hope that all the people who were Bernie supporters, can take all that passion and say, we were looking for more of a rock the boat, change the status quo, and we really loved Bernie. But I really, really hope that as many of them as possible will work for the Democratic ticket to get elected, because the alternative of another 4 years of Trump is something that our nation does not deserve to have to suffer under.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And that's actually one of the things that I disagree with what Rosa said, everything, because she was actually on the call. She was actually very much of a Bernie supporter. And she actually said yesterday that in our interview that she will be voting as a write-in for Rosa and everything. But she was also a member of the Green Party. So I do know that she's always been an independent voice and one of those people that has an independent voice in the way that she structures things and thinks about things. And I also am of
well, think about the 2004 election. I mean, even before it got to Florida and hanging chads and Bush v. Gore, we had Ralph Nader running as an independent, Green Party. And I loved Ralph Nader up until that point, because I knew him, I was supporting his work. And I was just so upset that he drained votes from Gore, and he didn't drain votes from Bush, for sure.
No, he didn't drain that at all. Do you think, and then I want to get to Ravinder's question, do you think that we can ever have, and it's one of the questions I asked Rosa, do you think that we can ever have a third party, or we can get rid of the Electoral College? Because I think that we need to do both. I personally think we need to get rid of the Electoral College for sure, because otherwise Hillary would have been president because she won the most votes. Exactly. And then I also think that we need, and actually there was a show that a friend of mine did, is on IBM TV, and he had some young podcasters. There's some questions as to whether they're teenagers or whether they were adults, because they may have been playing and pulling our legs with their age. So I'm not 100% sure how old they are. But one of their things that they said, whether they're in their 20s or in their teens, was that they felt that we needed to have almost like a president of committee. And this was young people that were saying this. So instead of having one president, you would have the White House being run by committee. So, I mean, that was just their idea as youngsters. But I was just wondering, what do you think of the notion of definitely third parties and other people, whether we can ever have that or whether we can get away from the presidential politics?
So let me start with the committee, because one of the things when women work together, women like to come to consensus. And so there's a caucus to discuss what we're allowed to talk about in the caucus, that we're going to make the decision about the caucus. I mean, there's like so much deliberation that it often takes forever to get there. So while I'm a wholehearted supporter, and everything I've said is about collaboration and inclusiveness, I also know that decisions need to be made. And so I do think that there has to be a decider, a kind of structure where, okay, I've taken in all the input and now I'm making a decision. This is, and that can happen in an inclusive way, in genuinely incorporating everybody's input. But at some point, I mean, any one of the movements that you see, there are hundreds of thousands of young people who showed up for the March for Our Lives, anti-gun, after the Parkland shooting. But there were like 6 of them who were like night and day from their, each other's basements, like texting out to the world the next action. And even among that committee, they each had a different function, and they knew what their function was and what their responsibility was. And so there was a structure within this kind of collaborative initiative. So I do actually believe in structure, inclusive structure, and that trying to decide things by committee is a losing proposition from my experience. Maybe you've had different experience. The Electoral College, definitely. And I believe we're moving in that direction. If you remember, in the 1984 presidential cycle, which was the first time that Jesse Jackson ran for president, at that point, it was still winner takes all.
Right.
And so he was winning large parts of the population in states, but not getting a single delegate because, someone else got the plurality. And then got all the delegates. So it was the Jesse Jackson campaign that advocated for proportional distribution. like you get the number. Now, not every state has adopted proportional distribution, but many states have, and the larger percentage of them have, so that now candidates, whether it's Biden, Bernie, whether it's Kamala, whether it's Amy, any one of the other, Warren, any one of the other amazing people who ran in this presidential primary season, they each have their delegates going into the convention. So that was a real breakthrough for him to get a political system to fundamentally change from a winner takes all to a proportional distribution. And I see that as the middle step to like eliminating the electoral college. Okay. And I'm not sure when we're going to get there. I've been to the mountain. I don't know when we're going to get there, but I've seen the promised land. I see it. I see that happening.
Okay.
Do I see third party? I don't know the answer to that. Having lived in Europe now for almost a decade, where they have multiple parties, it still ends up being that the two strongest parties tend to be one or the other, and the other parties siphon off one or the other. And that's why you see, like, after elections, there are these parliamentary procedures where they have to form a government because they've got to get enough of people from another party to support their coalition in order to form a leading government. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of reform that needs to happen in politics in general. Right. Certainly getting big money out of it. I mean, that if I were like choosing an issue to focus on, it would be ending big money. When, back when Citizens United, the U.S. Supreme Court decision that allowed unlimited amounts of corporate money to go into political, it already was a swamp before that, but it just became worse. I mean, in the 1988 presidential cycle, I happened to be the finance chair for New York and the national co-chair, vice chair for the euphemistically named Democratic Victory Fund, Presidential Victory Fund. We didn't win, but it was when the New York Times coined the term sewer money. Right. And it was already the beginning of the end, and that's the last cycle in which I ever raised money for political campaigns. I'll do organizing for political campaigns, but I won't raise money because it's I see the effects of large corporations. I admire the candidates who choose to only take small donations and not to take corporate money or PAC money, but it's in the current system, it's impossible to win an election without having gargantuanly obscene amounts of money, and it just that allows people who have the money to have access to decision makers in a way that people who don't have financial resources never have access, and it just is a corrosive, corrupting power. So if I were to focus on anything for elections, I'd say let's focus on,
And politics is such an interesting game. My mom actually ran here in North Carolina a couple of decades ago for Secretary of State. And of course, while she was running, she was trying to build coalition. She was trying to do this. A lot of people might have made promises and then they didn't deliver on those promises because they didn't feel that it was going to be a winning proposition for them. So they jumped ship and did other things involved in the politics. So she actually did force a runoff with the person that won the seat and who still has the office of Secretary of State, that being Elaine Marshall, because she's had it for a number of years. And then if Elaine beat our famous NASCAR driver, Richard Petty, because it was during that run that Richard Petty was running, but Mom did force a runoff. So she definitely had that experience of running a statewide campaign. I remember going to a couple of events. Didn't do as many as I probably should have, neither me or my younger brother, but just in conversations with her, I've seen how politics on a state level can be an interesting game, to say the least. Robinder, the question he had, and this kind of ties into your other work, is he's asking, would it not reduce extremism and hatred in the long term if the children of today were taught values of empathy, compassion, kindness, respect for diversity, as a compulsory course for all kids in all schools across the world from first grade to 10th grade. And I do know that a lot of your work deals with that on the corporate level. You talk about dealing with compassion and empathy on a corporate America level. There are some companies, including some companies based here in North Carolina, that have a history of having at least some compassion. I'm thinking about like the Red Hats of the world that try to provide some different ways to make sure that if young women have kids, that the kids have daycare and some of the other things that some of these corporations are doing. And like I said, I know some people at Red Hat and won't say that I know any of the leaders, so I don't have any dog in the fight by mentioning them. And the same, I want to say with IBM and Cisco, that they've done some great work in those kind of areas. And I do know that that's a passion of yours and your company and everything. So I just wanted you to talk about that and whether you think that it would be a good course. And he said the reason he's asking that is he's actually working on a global campaign that is pushing for a syllabus of live and let live in all schools for children ages 5 to 15. And like I said, Ravinder is based, I believe it's either in India or Pakistan.
So Ravinda, if you're watching this on FaceTime Live, which I understand you are, then you should see my profile and you can message me about this because I'd love to follow up on it. I'm Nadine Hack. That's who I am on Facebook. / Nadine Hack, and you'll find me. Absolutely, totally, completely. What you are advocating is so utterly needed everywhere on the face of earth. If children are, there's not an infant who is born hating. You have to learn hatred. You have to learn fear. There's not an infant on earth who's born believing that Christianity is better than Islamism, or vice versa, or that Judaism is better than Hinduism. That you have to be taught what. And if children were taught, and I'd say not just first grade, like pre-K, started in pre-K, and if you started in pre-K, then you also simultaneously teach the parents. It's like in the 70s. When you were talking, Mark, about the 70s and high school, I was thinking in the 70s when there began to become an environmental consciousness about recycling cans, it was the kids who were telling their parents, don't throw that in the garbage. Have a separate container for cans because we can recycle. So yes, I think it should start in pre-K. I think it should be an absolutely required course. It's one of the most fundamental, with it, and as exactly the way you posited it, Rabinda, compassion, empathy, kindness, generosity of spirit. These are fundamental human values that are not. You don't have to. A lot of school systems are concerned about letting religion into there, but it doesn't have to be religious based. It's just fundamental human values of goodness, kindness, compassion. It would be wonderful if every pre-K student and their parents, had to accompany them and learn it alongside of them, because their parents probably were not raised that way. And over time, we would definitely, the whole world could change if from youngest age possible, every person was taught to be kind and good and caring and compassionate. So I love your idea, Rabinda.
And Ravinder said that he is definitely watching. He just wrote down back and he said, thanks, Nadine. He is based in Delhi. So he's based, like I said, it is India that he's based in. So he's definitely going to probably reach out to you and have communication with you. But he did say that he was watching. But I was just curious now, you do a lot of this work, and I know that that's kind of what Because is about and everything is in the business world. What kind of resistance do you get from the business world? Because the business world is taught that kind of philosophy of business. And there's some business leaders that I actually admire. Like I'm a big fan of, I think that Marc Cuban does some good work in the sense of being a business leader and things of that nature. I'm not a big fan of that person whose name we won't talk about. Because one, I don't think he's that great of a business leader because he's actually killed a lot of businesses more than he actually created, and people want to forget that. But I do fear that sometimes when we're getting people that are trying to go into business, whether they're entrepreneurs and there is an entrepreneur movement, in the country, and might even be more of an entrepreneur movement because of COVID, because a lot of people have been thrown out of jobs, so they got to find new jobs, and they might decide to create their own. But I feel that sometimes in the business world, we get too caught up in the old Wall Street way of doing business, and there's not enough learning about empathy and things of that nature. So I was just wondering your thoughts on that, because I love us doing business. I mean, I live here in Durham, North Carolina, which is one of the original Black Wall Streets. I mean, there's also there's other places as well, but Durham was definitely one of the original Black Wall Streets, and definitely had some great business leaders and had some great even race relations that existed in Durham between, like, let's say, the Black elite and the white elite. But there was some classism that was going on in Durham as well, both among the Black elite and some of the poorer Blacks, and definitely just among the different classes that exist. Like I said, Ravinder's watching from India, and I've had some conversations with some of my friends from those countries that are caste-based. And we hate to say it, but in some ways, the United States is also a caste system in some ways. So definitely, I just wanted
very
to
much so.
that, because of the fact that you're dealing with business leaders. And I mean, like I said, I gave the example of Mark Cuban. I've also, because I work with a testing company, so I've read up on Elon Musk, and there are some things about him that I like. There might be some things I'm not too sure about. I don't know that I want to go. And I too am a fan of Star Wars, Star Trek kind of science fiction, but I don't know that I want to go blasting off into space and everything right now. You know, it might be better up there, but I don't know that I want to go on that long space ride. But that being said, and of course he's trying to get those trips, and also those trips are highly expensive. I probably couldn't afford it anyway, even if I wanted to go. I have a hard enough time. Well, our buses are free because of COVID right now, but sometimes even they were not free. I had a hard enough time digging up the $2 or the $4 if I wanted to go to certain towns and everything. So that being said, I was just wondering your thoughts when you're dealing with these business leaders. So, like I said, in reading up on you, I do know that is one of your passions.
Well, for well over a decade, really more like 2 decades now, it's become almost de rigueur that every company on earth has a mission statement that includes some version of what we call the triple P: people, planet, profit. And, i.e., we care about our people, our employees, our customers. We care about our planet. We're setting sustainability goals, and we care about profit. So we're figuring out how to do well by doing good. And the real question is, how many of them are walking the walk, not just talking the talk? And for the large part, sadly, still, most companies are still talking about it or taking very small steps toward aspirational goals and not doing enough. And just this past August, something called the Business Roundtable, which is a consortium of mega multinational companies under the leadership of Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan. So it gives you a sense of the type of players we're talking about. They issued a statement in which they redefined the purpose of a corporation, not just to move away from the primacy of shareholder value, in other words, making money for the shareholders at any expense, to instead, quote, promote an economy that benefits all. And that was in August. And then in September, Gillian Tett, who's the US managing editor of the Financial Times, wrote a piece called "Does Capitalism Need to be Saved from Itself?" And then right after that, the Financial Times launched a series called Moral Money, and it was dedicated to explaining to investors why they should pay attention to environmental, social, and governance, or what we call ESG principles. And at the time, I had exchanges with Gillian, and I also had exchanges with Paul Polman, the former CEO of Unilever, who recently, just during that same time period, launched something called Imagine. You can go to it, imagine.com, imagine.org. It's I can't remember exactly, but Imagine One, I think, takes you there. And it's dedicated to motivating companies to act with a collective sense of urgency to battle inequity, to battle climate change. And at that time, I had my interchanges with the two of them, Gillian and Paul, were about why we believe that we might finally be at a tipping point where the companies' corporate social responsibility would be something that businesses would actually act on, not just talk about. Eternal optimist that I am, I've been at that point before where I thought we were at a tipping point, where I thought it was going to happen. For businesses to genuinely care more about corporate social responsibility, human rights, diversity, inclusion, the whole spectrum of social justice issues we've been talking about. There are steps and there are people, and it's great to highlight like what those business leaders who are doing good, like you mentioned, a local company that's doing something, that's doing real, providing. There are companies now that have stepped up to the plate with COVID, have, really given out enormous amounts of either cash and or goods or services. And I applaud that. And wherever there's been corporate social responsibility, philanthropy to help local communities. It used to be when companies were based in a town, that town would be the beneficiary. So like you take something like Kodak, and, in Rochester, then that community really benefited. And then where are we on the spectrum?
But it seems like just as while you're thinking about that, it seems like some of the corporations even got away from that, because I remember what you're talking about. I remember being involved in a number of music festivals. I've been on the planning committee of music festivals. I've been the MC of music festivals, but definitely on the planning end. And I remember early when I got involved, and that was shortly after I came out of college. I came out in '84, so let's say the late '80s into the early '90s. I remember a lot of corporations that sponsored a lot of these festivals. And there's still sponsors out there in the corporate world, but we've definitely seen corporations drop their sponsorship because now they want to see that they are getting the biggest bang for the buck. Right, but like you said, before it used to be about kind of a mission driven thing. So they were doing it as a means to help the society and the area. They might not have even felt that they were going to get a certain amount of money, but now they want to know, am I going to be seen by X, Y amount of people? I remember going to, and I'll even name the company. I remember going, because we went to the same college. Going to the past president of Cree and about a blues festival. I was like, look, I'd love to use a sponsor. And his basic answer was, he kind of shifted me off to somebody. But his also basic answer was, unless we're going to be seen by a certain millions of eyes, which you're not going to be seen at a 2-day festival, then it's probably not going to be something that we're going to do. So that just kind of like, but I just remember earlier days where, it'd be more about being seen by folks that might be buying the product. Of course, there are a LED company or people that might be just doing it for a good deed, just to show your community love and the fact that you are part of that community. And it just seems to me that corporate America has in some ways gotten away from that and because of that greed element.
Well, interestingly enough, Mark, there's a lot of discussion happening in corporate circles about the importance of coming back to mission, purpose driven, and largely it's because millennials and those who are even younger than millennials care about those issues now. Like the people who are coming into the workforce and the people who are coming into the consumer base, they want companies to be ethical. They only want to buy products where they know it's been fair trade and it hasn't been child labor and it hasn't been blood diamonds, and they don't want diamonds, even if it wasn't blood diamonds. They don't want material things in the same way. They don't need to own things. They've grown up in the circular sharing economy. So I think that companies are looking at this now, and there are certainly. I just want to say, hi. Tim Sohn, you've just popped up on the screen. There certainly are still now exemplary companies. Take a company like Patagonia. From the time it was formed, it had a social mission, and it has supported socially responsible. It's had socially responsible practices itself, and it's promoted socially responsible practices throughout the community, throughout the nation, throughout the world. And they, by the way, when DJT gave the huge tax break to multinationals, they took every dollar of it and donated it to not-for-profit social justice causes. They did not put a penny of it into their own company. So they are really, truly walking the walk. And so there are people like Rose Mercurio, the CEO of Patagonia, who are stellar examples. And Paul Pullman was one at Unilever, which is why he's like formed this consortium, Imagine, to inspire other companies to do the same. And I think we have a role as consumers to be very clear, like even if we're not millennials, to say, we're not buying products. We want to know what your practice is. We're not investing in you. We're not buying, we're not buying your products. We're not buying your goods and your services. If you are, that was what those of us who were a part of the divestment campaign for South Africa said. We won't buy if you're like doing stuff in South Africa because you're supporting an apartheid regime. And honestly, with all else, it was really the money pressure on the South African economy that got the government to the table. It was not, it was not wonderful spirit of but it doesn't matter what got them there. They got there, and the whole system changed. So we can use our purchasing power to make strong statements that we will not tolerate abusive practices. We will not buy things from companies that are polluting the planet. We will not. And then if you happen to be wealthy enough to actually have an investment portfolio, then you make sure that you're being really careful in your vetting, because there are socially responsible funds. There's funds like citizens funds and oh my God, ones that have been around forever, Pax World funds, and that only that have very rigorous screening of what they will invest in and not, and put your money where your mouth is. So.
And how do you think we're doing this in terms of, because I know a lot of these companies, and I think that they might be trying to be socially conscious as well, but I just don't know that much about them. I do know some people that work for them, and I'm wondering, how are we doing with our gig economies? Because there's so many gig jobs that are coming out there. I'm thinking about the companies like Uber and Grubhub and DoorDash in the food services. And we know that they're being very much considered essential workers now, but I was just wondering how they're doing in terms of being corporate citizens, because this is a new market of the corporate world, of the whole gig economy. And I personally am not that sure. I know that they are usually run by relatively young people, because I did look them up, because I got a friend that drives for both Grubhub and DoorDash. So I did look up who their leaders are. And I know that one of them is I think there's one of the companies, and I don't remember which, that's a Chinese American that runs, and there's another one that's run by a Russian American, but a lot of them, when I looked at their background, they were definitely, I would say, in the 40 younger kind of crowd, just because that's the gig economy, and that's who was creating these kind of jobs. And I do know that gig jobs are very important, whether it's those kind of gigs or freelance writing or whatever. But I don't know, sometimes because they're gigs, they don't have the same kind of corporate structure that some of our bigger corporations do. So how are they doing in terms of being global citizens and corporate good faith kind of citizens, in your opinion, these kind of gig companies?
Well, one of the things that we've seen, as I said earlier, COVID has laid bare things that were already there, but now it's just more obvious to a larger number of people. The good and the bad on the gig economy. The good is that it gives people the flexibility to work how they want, when they want, where they want. The bad is there's no safety net. There's no health benefits. There's no paid leave for parental leave, maternity leave, paternity leave. There's no, we're seeing just how vulnerable people in the gig economy are. And in fact, many people in the gig economy are suffering the worst because they have the least support. And so this ties into, this is how everything is interconnected to everything. When we're, working to, at one point, the idea of Social Security was like outrageous before it was passed.
Right.
And at one point, the idea of no child labor was outrageous until it was passed. I mean, all of these advances that we've made over historically, we still need to make more advances to make sure that every human being, like, let's just start with America, every human being that lives in America should have a sense of security that if they get sick, they can go to a hospital. They don't have to choose between eating or going to the doctor. That they, the fundamental underpinnings of a healthy society. And I think this ties into what Rabinda mentioned earlier. I mean, if we teach people compassion and caring from the time they're young, it's more likely that when they're in institutions, whether it's business institutions, government institutions, or other types of institutions, that they are going to advocate for policies that are compassionate and show kindness. So I'd say that's
hopefully
where
we'll
we
see more
are.
of that, because I know I've got friends in the art world, and of course the art world is another world that has been definitely impacted by COVID, and of course they're trying to raise funds so that they can survive, because unfortunately many of them, except for doing it online, and I commend them for doing that when they can, are not having that many performances. So of course they're struggling big time, but some of their institutions, like we have a thing here called the North Star Church of the Arts, and you probably know the person that it was the passion project of, and that was Phil Freelon, who has since passed, but he was one of the lead architects for the Museum of African American History that's in Washington, D.C., and he passed of a disease. I think it was Lou Gehrig's. It was one of those kind of diseases and everything. So he passed of that, but his wife, Nina Freelon, and his son, as well as the other family members, are continuing the North Star Church of the Arts, which is kind of like one of his passion projects, and it's definitely an arts organization here in this area, along with the Durham Arts Council and Pinhook, which is a local, long-time running nightclub, and they've been doing these different kinds of fundraisers to help our arts community, because the arts community just in general has been devastated by COVID, because a lot of those festivals have been canceled. A lot of things that they would usually be making their money off of during the summer are not happening. So we have seen even the impact of that with the gig economy and our local people, unfortunately.
Well, it comes back to, again, do whatever you can in the sphere where you have, like it can be an effort on your block.
Right.
It can be an effort in your neighborhood. It can be an effort in your city or village. It can be an effort state. It can be an effort regional. It can be an effort national. It can be an effort global. It can be an effort in health, education, human services. Choose something and make a promise to yourself and the world that you are going to do what you can to contribute to making this world a better place.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Just real quickly, because I do want to wind it down and everything.
Yeah,
I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on and everything.
Me too. I missed, I'm supposed to have been on a call that started 15 minutes ago, and I've heard my phone ring like 3 times.
And I actually turned my phone off. I'm on the board of the Carolina Theater. So as soon as I get off with you, I've got to jump on a Zoom call to find out what's going on with our board meeting. But I definitely have enjoyed our conversation and want to continue these kind of conversations with you in the near future, even if it's nothing but just us chit-chatting. It doesn't have to be on Facebook Live or whatever, but I definitely am enjoying our conversation and hope that this is the beginning of a long friendship with you and your husband and everybody else.
I feel the same way.
So definitely enjoyed the conversation and want to continue the conversation. But that being said, I did want you to have a chance to tell folks how they can reach you, tell about your organization, and if you got any parting thoughts that you want to share. You've already shared a lot, but if you've got any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience.
I think that last thought about do what you can where you are is where I'd like to leave it. Because I think there's nothing I can say that's more direct and more powerful than that. But if you want to find out more, my organization is called Because Global Consulting. So it's just because.net, like the word because. It's small b, capital C, like B, the cause. Because right. Global Consulting. So because.net is my company. You can check that out. And my not-for-profit is Global Citizen Circle, and you just type in globalcitizencircle.org. So because.net or globalcitizencircle.org, and you can find out a lot more. And at Global Citizen Circle, you can sign up for, we host free virtual circles on topics. You can make suggestions for topics. You can lead discussions. You can join discussions. And at because.net, you can see, a lot of videos that I've done, a lot of blog posts I've done if you're interested, and there's also contact information there. So that's the easiest way to reach me is through because.net.
Okay, and I definitely hope that people will do that. I'm going to put on, and you'll see it come across the screen, Rovinder's information in his comment, because he did have that comment about, fundamental human values as compulsory will certainly connect. And he thanked me for having this conversation. So that's how you can find Ravinder, and that is how you spell his name and everything. So hopefully the two of you will connect.
Well, I'll be able to see it on the Facebook Live, chat box.
Yes.
Like, even though it will be over, I'll be able to see it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. So definitely wanted to keep that in mind. It's been great having Nadine on, and definitely, like I said, this will be one of our special editions that we're running on our platform that we have. Like I said, we usually do the Blog Talk radio show, Straight Talk with Dean and Mark, on Monday evenings, but I do know that sometimes because of people being in different time zones, like Nadine's over there in Switzerland, I had Renita that's in India, that it's not always conducive to y'all's time. So I've done these special editions, and so I was glad to have you on, and we'll be putting it up later on this week. So definitely people have been watching it on Facebook Live, but we'll also put it on our next level platform as well, which is what we call our network that we do, me and Dean. So I'm thinking that he'll probably put you on either Wednesday or Thursday, but I'll be in touch with him to find out what day, and I'll also send you an email so that you can let folks know to listen at that time as well. So there'll be more of listening than watching. But thanks for joining me on this conversation. I'm going to jump on my meeting, and I look forward to having many other conversations with you.
Me too. The feeling is 100% mutual.
Thank you.
Okay. Be well.
Do the same. Be well. Stay safe.
Thanks.